Karen banged on my front door, shouting she had the right to enter. I told her to back off, but she shoved harder, trying to push her way inside. Within minutes, a sheriff pulled up. Karen smirked, thinking I was finished. But when the officer stepped out, her jaw dropped. He was my son. The morning had started quietly. The kind of suburban calm where you could hear sprinklers ticking in the distance, a lawnmower a few houses down, and the faint laughter of kids riding bikes down the cul-de-sac. I had just poured myself a fresh cup of coffee when it happened, the sound that every homeowner dreads. Bang, bang, bang. The pounding on my front door wasn't the casual knock of a visitor or even the impatient tap of a delivery driver. No, this was a demand, aggressive, sharp, rattling the glass in the frame. I froze for a moment, mug halfway to my lips. Then came the voice. Open this door. HOA inspection. My stomach sank. Karen. Every neighborhood has one, and ours was cursed with the Karen, mid-50s, short blonde bob cut like it was drawn with a ruler, floral blouse stretched too tight, clipboard glued to her hand as if it were a badge of power. She wasn't just on the HOA board. She was the HOA board, at least in her mind. I set the coffee down, already bracing myself. Another round of pounding shook the door. I said, open up. I swung the door open just enough to see her standing there, lips pinched tight, eyes narrowed in contempt. Morning, Karen, I said flatly. She didn't bother with greetings. Instead, she shoved her clipboard forward, tapping it with a manicured finger. I'm here for an interior inspection. HOA regulations. You know the rules. I blinked, stunned for a moment before shaking my head. Karen, the HOA doesn't have the right to come inside my house. Ever. She sniffed, clearly offended. That's where you're wrong. I've had multiple complaints about the state of your property. Peeling paint, weeds in the side yard, questionable activity. I have every right to ensure compliance. I laughed, not because it was funny but because the sheer audacity left me no other option. Questionable activity? Karen, you're trespassing. You can't just demand to come into my home. Her face flushed red. Don't you dare speak to me about trespassing. As long as you're under this HOA, I have authority. And if you don't let me in, I'll fine you so heavily you'll regret ever moving here. I started to close the door, but she was quicker. Karen wedged her foot between the door and the frame, slamming it against her sensible shoes with a dull thud. The door stopped cold, half open, and her eyes locked onto mine with a triumphant gleam. You can't stop me, she hissed. I tightened my grip on the door handle. Move your foot. Now. Not until I've done my inspection. She leaned forward, pressing her shoulder against the door, trying to force it wider. I know you're hiding violations. Everyone knows. I've had reports. My patience was slipping fast. I pushed back, forcing the door against her foot, but she braced harder. Karen, I swear if you don't move, you're the one who's going to regret this. Her voice rose, loud enough for the whole street to hear. You're a disgrace to this neighborhood. You think you can ignore the rules, drag our property values down? I'll fine you into bankruptcy if that's what it takes. A flicker of movement caught my eye, blinds shifting in the house across the street. Neighbors were watching. Great. Karen was putting on a show. She smirked, sensing my hesitation. Go on. Slam the door. Hurt me. Everyone's watching. I'll have you arrested for assault. My heart pounded in my chest, half from anger, half from disbelief. Was this really happening? A grown woman forcing her way into my home over imaginary HOA authority? I gritted my teeth and shoved harder, my shoulder pressed to the door. She grunted but held firm, her foot still blocking it. This is insane, I muttered. Karen's grin widened. You're insane. I'll prove it. I'll make sure you never live peacefully in this neighborhood again. That was the breaking point. I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it up where she could see. My thumb hovered over the screen as I said, clear and firm, you've got 3 seconds to move your foot. 1, 2. She didn't budge. Go ahead, she sneered. Call them. The police know me. They'll take my side. You'll see. My thumb pressed down, dialing 911. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm voice filled the air. I glanced at Karen, her smirk still plastered across her face. Yes, I said, steady but loud enough for her to hear. I need an officer at my address immediately. A woman is trying to force her way into my home. She's trespassing and refusing to leave. Karen's eyes glittered with something almost like victory. She crossed her arms, clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield. Perfect. Finally. Let them come. You're finished. I hung up, pulse racing, every muscle tight with tension. Neighbors' curtains swayed as more faces peeked out, the whispers traveling like wildfire through the block. Karen leaned closer to the crack in the door, her perfume nauseatingly strong. You've made a mistake. You think this is going to save you? No. When the sheriff arrives, you'll see. They'll back me. Not you. I met her stare, unflinching. We'll see. Minutes dragged by, the silence broken only by the hum of cicadas and the low murmur of neighbors gossiping across lawns. Karen stayed planted, foot in the door, arms crossed, chin raised like a queen awaiting her guards. And then, the sound. WOA. WOA. Sirens. Karen's smile spread wide, triumphant. Told you. They're coming for you. I didn't flinch. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off windows as the squad car turned into our street. Tires crunched on asphalt, the engine rumbled low. Karen straightened her blouse, smoothed her hair, and fixed her face into a look of false concern. This is it, she whispered, almost giddy. Now you'll learn. I stood firm, hand still on the door, jaw tight. The cruiser slowed, pulling to the curb in front of my house. Doors unlocked with a metallic clunk. Karen tilted her head toward me, smug. Say goodbye to your freedom. The squad car door swung open. A figure stepped out. And Karen's smirk froze midair. Her eyes widened, lips parting in shock as recognition flickered across her face. She stumbled backward, finally pulling her foot from the doorway. The sheriff who had arrived wasn't just any officer. He was my son. The sight of my son stepping out of that cruiser should have ended the madness right there. Any reasonable person would have backed down. But this was Karen, and Karen didn't know the meaning of the word reasonable. She froze for only a heartbeat, her eyes darting between me and the sheriff walking up the driveway. Then, as if realizing the audience of neighbors still peeking through blinds and standing on porches, she puffed out her chest, flipped her blonde bob, and plastered on a look of smug confidence. This is perfect, she whispered under her breath. Absolutely perfect. I clenched my jaw, bracing for what was coming. My son, Sheriff Daniel Carter, strode up the driveway with the calm authority that came from years of training and experience. He was in his early 30s, broad-shouldered, with the steady gaze of a man who didn't rattle easily. His badge gleamed in the sunlight, every step deliberate, boots crunching against the concrete. Karen tilted her head, clipboard clutched tight against her floral blouse like it was some holy scripture. Finally, she announced loudly, projecting her voice for the neighbors. Finally, someone here to deal with this man. She jabbed a finger toward me, her voice sharp with triumph. My son's eyes flicked from her to me. Sir, he said evenly, we got a call about trespassing? Before I could answer, Karen shoved herself into the conversation. Yes, officer. Thank goodness you're here. I caught him violating HOA rules, and when I demanded access to inspect his home, he assaulted me. Slammed the door on my foot. It's a miracle I'm not injured. Gasps rippled through the small crowd of neighbors who had now gathered in small knots across the lawns. Karen held her clipboard higher, like proof of her authority. Assault, trespassing, disorderly conduct, she continued, counting charges off with her manicured fingers. He's a menace. I've warned the board for months. This man is destroying our property values. You need to arrest him immediately. I let out a bitter laugh. That's not what happened, and you know it. Karen spun toward me, eyes blazing. Oh, don't you dare. You tried to keep me out of this house when I was lawfully performing my duties. Everyone saw it. Her voice carried across the street, feeding off the spectacle. More blinds shifted, more cell phones lifted discreetly to record. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore, it was becoming a neighborhood circus. Daniel, however, didn't flinch. He had the patience of a man who dealt with 100 Karens before. He held up a hand, commanding silence. Ma'am, step back. I need to hear from both of you. Karen obeyed halfway, retreating only a foot before launching into another tirade. This man has weeds in his side yard, peeling paint on his trim, and there are rumors, about what goes on in that garage. Suspicious activity, officer. If we don't get inside and inspect, the entire neighborhood is at risk. My son turned to me, one eyebrow raised. Suspicious activity? I shrugged, exasperated. The only suspicious thing I've got in my garage is an old lawnmower that won't start. Karen gasped dramatically, as if I'd just confessed to harboring contraband. See? He admits it. Hiding things. He can't be trusted. Daniel sighed, pulling a small notepad from his vest. All right, let's get this straight. Sir, did you invite this woman into your home? Of course not, I said. She came pounding on my door, demanding entry. When I told her she had no right, she shoved her foot in the doorway and tried to push inside. She wouldn't leave, so I called you. Karen shook her head furiously, waving her clipboard like a sword. Lies. He's lying. I was acting under HOA authority. At that, my son finally cracked the faintest smile. Not of humor, but of disbelief. Ma'am, the HOA doesn't give you the right to force your way into someone's house. Karen faltered for the briefest moment, her lips twitching. But then she rallied, glaring back at him. Oh, I think you'll find it does. Section 14B, paragraph 2. Right here. She slapped her clipboard against her palm. It's all documented. The neighbors buzzed with whispers, torn between curiosity and disbelief. Some shook their heads, muttering about how she was at it again. Others crossed their arms, waiting to see how this showdown would play out. Karen stepped forward, pointing her finger just inches from Daniel's chest. You're going to regret siding with him. If you don't act now, you're complicit. The HOA will sue and you'll lose your badge. Daniel didn't blink. He simply leaned closer, voice calm but edged with steel. Ma'am, if you don't remove your foot from this property and step back right now, you'll be the one facing charges. Karen blinked, taken aback for the first time. She turned, scanning the neighbors as if searching for support. But all she saw were frowns and shaking heads. Her voice cracked slightly, though she tried to cover it with volume. You can't threaten me. I am the HO. And if you... She stopped mid-sentence, suddenly aware that her foot was still wedged near the threshold, inches inside my doorway. Daniel's gaze followed mine down toward it, then back up to Karen. His voice dropped, quieter but somehow sharper. Do you realize what you've just done? Karen swallowed hard, her bravado faltering under the weight of his stare. What do you mean? You're not just harassing him, Daniel said slowly. You've crossed into his home. That's trespassing. That's a crime. Karen's face went pale. She took a small, shaky step backward, her clipboard slipping slightly in her grip. For the first time all morning she looked unsure. And the entire neighborhood held its breath, waiting for what came next. The red and blue lights flickered across the manicured lawns, washing over the white fences and polished SUVs lining the street. What should have been a quiet morning had turned into a full-blown neighborhood spectacle. The longer it went on, the more people spilled out onto porches, driveways, and sidewalks. Karen, however, treated it like her grand stage. She stood tall now, clipboard clutched against her chest like a general holding a command manual. Her earlier flicker of fear at my son's words was gone, buried beneath layers of arrogance and denial. You see, she called out loudly, projecting her voice to the gathering audience. The sheriff is here. Order will finally be restored. This man, she jabbed her finger toward me without even looking, will learn that the rules are not optional. Her tone dripped with victory as though she'd already won and was simply waiting for the gavel to fall. Daniel kept his composure, his boots steady on the driveway, his hand casually resting near his belt. His face was unreadable, but I could tell from the set of his jaw that he wasn't impressed. Still, Karen mistook his calm silence for validation. You don't have to thank me now, neighbors, she continued, raising her chin higher. But you'll see. Property values matter. Safety matters. Discipline matters. And if I have to drag this man through the law to protect us all, then I'll do it. A low murmur spread across the crowd. Some shook their heads, tired of her antics. Others whispered nervously, unsure what would happen next. I noticed a few phones recording, red lights blinking, cameras capturing every second. Karen thrived on it. She turned her body slightly so the onlookers could see her better, one hand on her hip, the other waving her clipboard like a badge of honor. This is for all of us, she declared. Don't you worry. The HOA won't let one bad apple spoil our community. I bit back a laugh, though my blood simmered. One bad apple? She was the whole rotten barrel. Daniel finally cleared his throat, his voice steady and firm. Ma'am, I need you to stop talking and listen. Karen glanced at him, smiled sweetly, then faced the crowd again. See? Even the sheriff knows I'm right. Her voice sharpened as she swung back toward me. You thought you could get away with ignoring me. You thought the HOA was just some suggestion. But now... Daniel raised his voice just slightly, cutting her off. Ma'am? Karen froze, the words slicing through her performance like a knife. The crowd quieted instantly. Step back, Daniel said, his gaze locked on her. This is not a stage. This is a legal matter. And right now, you are the one causing the problem. A ripple of gasps ran through the neighbors. Karen blinked, her smile faltering. What? Daniel took a step closer, his shadow stretching over her. You forced your way onto this property after being told to leave. You wedged your foot in the doorway and refused to move. That's trespassing. That's a crime. Karen's face flushed bright red, a mix of fury and disbelief. She shook her head rapidly, words tumbling out like she was drowning. No, 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 you don't understand. I have authority. I was protecting the neighborhood. The HOA grants me the right. Daniel didn't flinch. The HOA doesn't override state law. The words landed heavy, final. The neighbors murmured louder, a wave of whispers spreading. Some even nodded, muttering things like, finally, and, it's about time someone told her. Karen turned in a slow circle as if begging someone, anyone, to back her up. But every set of eyes avoided hers. Even the neighbors who'd once tolerated her were silent now. Her voice cracked as she tried again, softer this time, almost desperate. You can't do this to me. I'm the president of the HOA. Daniel's jaw tightened. No. You're a resident just like everyone else. And right now, you're a resident trespassing on someone else's property. Her mouth opened and closed, no words forming. For the first time, I saw something flicker across her face that I never thought I'd see. Fear. But then she caught herself, straightened her spine, and snapped back with defiance. If you arrest me, you'll regret it. The HOA board will sue you. You'll lose your badge. Daniel didn't even blink. His hand shifted slightly closer to his cuffs. Karen stepped back instinctively, nearly tripping over her own feet. She looked around wildly, searching for some lifeline in the sea of judging faces. But the crowd only leaned closer, hungry for resolution. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling now. You wouldn't dare. Daniel's gaze didn't waver. Ma'am, do you realize what you've just admitted to in front of half the neighborhood? You've crossed a legal boundary. If I choose, I can take you into custody right now. Karen's eyes darted from him to me, then back again. The confidence, the smugness, the arrogance, it all cracked like thin glass. For the first time, she understood she wasn't the one in control anymore. And yet, even cornered, she tried to bluff. Why you wouldn't? The HOA needs me. The neighborhood needs me. If I fall, everything falls apart. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice low but cutting through the silence. The only thing falling apart right now is your story. The crowd erupted into murmurs again, some people chuckling, others shaking their heads in disbelief. A couple of neighbors even pulled out lawn chairs, settling in like it was evening entertainment. Karen's breathing quickened. She opened her mouth to scream again, to lash out, but before she could, Daniel spoke the words that froze her in place. Ma'am, he said firmly, his hand brushing the cuffs at his belt, do you realize you just committed a crime? Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water, gasping but unable to form a coherent word. The sheriff's tone, calm but edged with steel, had sliced through her bravado. You, she stammered, gripping her clipboard like a lifeline. Her eyes darted from Daniel to me, then back again. Wait, you two, you know each other? A ripple of murmurs rolled through the crowd, neighbors whispering and craning their necks for a better look. Daniel kept his face composed, but his eyes softened for a split second as he glanced at me. That's right, he said flatly. This man is my father. The words hung heavy in the air. Karen blinked, stumbling back half a step as though she'd been struck. The smug confidence drained from her face, replaced with shock and confusion. Your father? She repeated, voice cracking. I crossed my arms, meeting her stare. Surprise, Karen. Not exactly the ally you thought you had, is he? A chorus of low chuckles and murmurs rippled through the gathering neighbors. Someone whispered loud enough for others to hear, guess the sheriff's not on her side after all. Karen flushed deep crimson. She spun toward the crowd, voice rising in desperation. This is a conflict of interest. He can't possibly be impartial. He'll just take your side. Daniel's jaw tightened. Ma'am, the law doesn't change because of relationships. The facts are the facts. And the fact is, you forced your way onto private property after being told to leave. Her eyes widened. No, that's not what happened. You're twisting it. I was... Karen. Daniel's voice sharpened, louder now, commanding silence. Enough. The word hit like a gavel. The murmurs died instantly, the tension so thick you could almost feel it pressing against your chest. Karen swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly as she held onto her clipboard. Her lips quivered, but her pride wouldn't let her stop. This is harassment, she shrieked suddenly, the sound shrill and jarring in the quiet street. You're all against me. This neighborhood needs me to keep it in order, and now you're conspiring to ruin me. I stepped forward, voice steady. No, Karen. You ruined yourself when you crossed the line. The crowd murmured again, some nodding in agreement. 4 years, many of them had lived under Karen's petty fines, her constant monitoring, her habit of photographing minor yard infractions at dawn. And now, for the first time, someone was standing up to her in full view of the community. Daniel shifted his stance, squaring his shoulders. Ma'am, here's the reality. The HOA may regulate landscaping, paint colors, and certain property standards. But it does not grant you authority to enter someone's private home. You pushed past a boundary. You refused to leave when asked. That's not an HOA matter. That's trespassing. Karen's eyes darted again to the neighbors, searching desperately for even a shred of support. But faces looked back at her coldly, some frowning, others shaking their heads. No, she whispered, her voice trembling now. You can't do this. You can't make me the villain here. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, you made yourself the villain. The word struck hard. A woman in the crowd clapped once, quietly but firmly. Another neighbor muttered, finally. Karen snapped her head toward them, eyes wild. You ungrateful cowards. I've been protecting this neighborhood for years. Without me, you'd all be living in filth and chaos. Her shriek echoed down the street, bouncing off the neat houses and echoing back like a warning siren. Daniel took a slow step closer. He didn't raise his voice, but the weight of his words carried farther than her screams. Ma'am, I'm giving you one chance to step back and walk away. Right now. Because the alternative is me putting you in handcuffs in front of every single one of your neighbors. Karen froze, chest heaving, clipboard trembling in her grip. Her lips pressed into a thin line as the reality of the moment finally hit. The neighbors leaned forward, waiting for her choice. Karen's pride and rage wrestled against the dawning fear in her eyes. Her breathing was ragged, uneven. Slowly, she backed away from the threshold, pulling her foot off the doorstep. But then she spun suddenly, pointing her clipboard at Daniel like a weapon. You can't scare me. You think you have the power, but I'll sue this entire department. I'll have your badge. And as for you, she jabbed the clipboard toward me, I'll bury you in fines until you can't breathe. Her words rang shrill, but her voice cracked halfway through, betraying her fear. Daniel's hand slid down, brushing against the cuffs on his belt. The crowd held their collective breath. Ma'am, he said coldly, do you really want to test me on this? Karen's eyes darted from his hand to his face, then to the crowd of neighbors, every one of them watching, recording, waiting. Her body shook with rage, her pride refusing to yield, even as the inevitability of her situation closed in around her. And then Daniel took one deliberate step closer, lowering his voice to a razor's edge. Do you realize you just committed a crime? Karen's breath caught in her throat, her eyes wide as the words sank in. The clipboard slipped slightly in her trembling hands. And the crowd waited in silence for her next move. For a long, tense moment, Karen just stood there. Her chest heaved, her face pale beneath the afternoon sun, the clipboard trembling against her blouse. The only sound was the distant hum of cicadas and the hushed whispers of neighbors gathered like an audience at a trial. Daniel broke the silence first. His voice was steady, official, as though he were reading from a law book. Ma'am, here's what you need to understand, he began. Right now you could be facing multiple charges. Trespassing, harassment, attempted unlawful entry, disorderly conduct. And that's just the start. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman across the street muttered to her husband, that's exactly what she deserves. Karen's eyes went wide. Charges? She sputtered. You can't be serious. This is outrageous. Daniel didn't flinch. Dead serious. You forced your way onto private property after being told to leave. You refused multiple warnings. You interfered with the homeowner's right to peace. And you escalated this situation in front of half the neighborhood. Everything you've done today can and will be used against you if I decide to file an official report. Karen's jaw dropped. She glanced at the neighbors, her face twisting in disbelief. Do you all hear this? He's threatening me, the HOA president. I have the authority here, not him. Her voice cracked, shrill and desperate. The neighbors didn't respond. Instead, they exchanged knowing looks, some shaking their heads, others recording silently with their phones. Karen turned back to Daniel, her eyes flashing with panic disguised as anger. No, you're wrong. You're abusing your power. I was doing my duty. Section 14B, paragraph 2. Daniel raised his hand sharply, cutting her off. Enough with the HOA handbook. I don't care what your binder says. The law is the law. And nothing in your so-called rules gives you the right to enter someone's house. Her lip quivered, but she pushed forward. You don't understand. If I don't keep this neighborhood in check, property values will plummet. I've been protecting everyone here for years. Without me, this place would be a slum. The crowd erupted in low murmurs, not in support but in disbelief. One man near the sidewalk muttered loudly enough for all to hear, "Protecting? More like bullying." Karen spun toward him, finger stabbing the air. You were late on your dues last spring. If it weren't for me, you'd have been evicted." The man laughed bitterly. "You tried to fine me for planting daisies." Laughter rippled through the group. Karen's face flushed bright red, her anger boiling over. She whipped back toward Daniel, her voice rising in a shriek. "You see? They're all ungrateful. They don't respect authority. That's why I have to be tough. And now you're siding with them? With him?" She pointed at me with a shaking hand. Daniel's expression hardened. His hand hovered near his cuffs again, not in haste, but in a deliberate reminder of who actually held authority. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "if you continue this behavior, I'll have no choice but to detain you right here, right now. Is that what you want? To be arrested in front of your neighbors?" The threat landed like a thunderclap. The crowd went dead silent, all eyes on Karen. She swallowed hard, her bravado faltering. For the first time, she seemed to recognize just how far this had spiraled out of her control. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. "You can't arrest me. I'm on the board. I am the board. If you touch me, I'll file a lawsuit so big your entire department will crumble." Daniel's jaw tightened. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a low growl that carried more weight than shouting ever could. "Ma'am, the badge on my chest doesn't bend to threats. And right now, you're one word away from testing it." Karen's breath hitched. She took a shaky step backward, her shoes scraping against the concrete. The clipboard wobbled in her grip. Still, her pride refused to die. She forced a bitter laugh, though it came out strained and hollow. "You think you're intimidating me? I've stared down board members twice your size. I've fought lawyers. I don't scare easily." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Then you're about to learn the difference between a lawyer and a sheriff." The neighbors gasped, the tension tightening like a noose around Karen's throat. Her face contorted with rage. She raised the clipboard high as if to throw it down in protest. "This is corruption. Pure corruption," she screamed. "You're all witnesses. He's protecting his father, abusing his position." She turned to the crowd, expecting cheers of support. Instead, silence met her. Cold, damning silence. A single voice rang out, an older woman near the back. "We're witnessing all right. We're witnessing the end of your reign, Karen." The crowd chuckled, some clapping quietly. Phones continued to record, red lights blinking like tiny judgments in the summer sun. Karen's eyes darted wildly, her world collapsing around her. Her breathing grew rapid, shallow. She turned back to Daniel, her voice breaking. "Why you can't do this? You can't." Daniel's voice was steady, final. "Step aside. Now." For a heartbeat, Karen didn't move. Then, slowly, she backed away, her heels clicking against the driveway. But her pride wasn't finished. With a sudden burst of defiance, she thrust the clipboard toward Daniel's chest. "Fine. Take your little victory. But you haven't seen the last of me. I'll bring the full weight of the HOA down on this family. You'll wish you never crossed me." Her words echoed across the street, shrill and hollow, bouncing off the rows of pristine houses. Daniel took one slow step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Ma'am," he said coldly, "you're 1 second away from me proving you wrong." Karen froze, her face drained of color. The neighbors held their breath, waiting for the inevitable. The silence after Daniel's last words clung to the air like a storm cloud. Every neighbor on that street seemed frozen, waiting to see whether Karen would finally fold or self-destruct. Karen's eyes darted around wildly, her chest rising and falling in quick bursts. Her pride wouldn't let her surrender, not in front of the entire neighborhood. With trembling hands, she thrust her clipboard up again, waving the stack of papers like they were a sword. "You think you can scare me with your badge?" she shouted, her voice shrill but cracking. "Well, I've got this. HOA bylaws. Section after section that gives me full authority over this neighborhood. You think you're the law? I am the law here." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered under their breath, "She's lost it." Karen flicked through the crumpled pages, jabbing her finger at random lines. "Right here. Board members have the right to inspect properties for compliance. Do you see that? Do you?" Daniel took the clipboard calmly, pulling the pages from her hands with one smooth motion. She gasped as if he had stolen a crown from her head. He flipped through the flimsy packet, scanning the amateur formatting, the faded HOA letterhead, and the bolded lines she had underlined in angry red ink. His lips pressed into a thin line as he sighed, shaking his head. "Ma'am," he said, voice cutting through the murmurs, "this is nonsense. These aren't legal documents. These are guidelines. The HOA can request exterior compliance, sure. They can fine people for paint colors or lawn conditions. But nothing in here, nothing, gives you the right to enter someone's home." Karen's face turned scarlet. "You're lying. You're twisting the meaning." Daniel raised the papers for the crowd to see. "Neighbors, let me make this clear. These so-called bylaws aren't law. They're agreements. They don't override state or federal law. And no matter what she says, this doesn't give her or anyone else the right to trespass." The crowd broke into low murmurs. Some nodded. A couple chuckled. One man laughed outright, shaking his head. All this time, and it was just smoke and mirrors. Karen spun toward them, eyes wide with fury. "Shut up. All of you. Without me, this neighborhood would be in shambles. Your lawns would be overgrown, your trash bins would be left out, your shutters would be peeling." A woman near the back spoke up, her voice firm. "Karen, our lawns are fine. It's you that's the problem." Karen gasped, clutching her chest like the words were daggers. "How dare you? I've sacrificed everything to keep this community pristine." Daniel lowered the clipboard slowly, his gaze never leaving her. "Ma'am, I'm running out of patience. You've trespassed. You've harassed. And now you're disrupting the peace of this entire neighborhood." Her lip trembled, but she puffed herself up again, trying to salvage the crumbling facade. "I'll sue all of you. I'll take this all the way to the courts. You'll see. I've beaten lawyers before. I'll beat you too." Daniel's jaw tightened. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his boots heavy against the driveway. "Ma'am, let me make this perfectly clear. If you don't leave this property immediately, I will have no choice but to arrest you for trespassing and disorderly conduct. That's not a threat. That's the law." The crowd collectively sucked in a breath. Phones rose higher, recording every second. The hum of whispered commentary buzzed like static. Karen's hands shook, her body trembling with rage and fear. She stepped back, then forward again, caught between fight and flight. Her pride screamed to stand her ground, but the cuffs at Daniel's belt gleamed like iron fangs waiting to snap shut. Still, she couldn't stop herself. "No," she screeched. "You don't scare me. You're just a boy hiding behind a badge. I've lived here for 20 years. I built this neighborhood. I control it. And I'll prove it." Before anyone could stop her, she lunged forward again, shoving her way toward the doorway, hands outstretched like claws. The neighbors gasped. Some shouted. Daniel's arm shot out, blocking her path. "That's it," he said sharply. "Enough." Karen froze mid-step, her face inches from his chest, her eyes wide with panic. His hand hovered over the cuffs, ready. The crowd waited, silent, holding their breath. Karen shook her head violently, her voice cracking. You wouldn't dare." Daniel's voice was low, steady, unshakable. "Try me." Karen's defiance faltered, her body trembling. But then she looked past him, locking eyes with me. Her face twisted into a mask of venom. "You think you've won?" she spat. "You think this ends here? No. I'll bury you in paperwork, in fines and lawsuits. You won't last a year here. I'll make sure of it." Daniel's hand brushed the cuffs again. The crowd leaned closer, anticipation buzzing like electricity in the air. Karen stumbled back a step, breathing hard, her threats ringing hollow. Her voice cracked as she screamed one last desperate declaration. "I am not leaving. Do you hear me? I am the HOA." The air was so thick with tension it felt like even the cicadas had gone silent. Karen stood trembling in the driveway, her arms shaking, her face twisted with rage and desperation. Her words, "I am the HOA," still echoed faintly down the street, like a line from a bad play everyone wished they could forget. Daniel didn't move for a long, heavy second. He just stared at her, his hand resting lightly on the cuffs at his belt, his voice calm but filled with warning. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "that's enough." Karen laughed. A brittle, humorless laugh that cracked halfway through. "Enough? No, this isn't enough. Not until this man is punished for defying me. Not until every neighbor knows who's in charge here." She jabbed her finger toward me, spittle flying with every word. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably, some muttering under their breath, others lifting phones higher to record. Every lens was trained on her, every eye watching, waiting. Daniel's voice cut through her rant. "Karen Miller, you are under arrest for trespassing, harassment, and disorderly conduct. The word struck like thunder. Karen froze. Her jaw dropped, clipboard slipping from her fingers and landing on the concrete with a hollow clap. She blinked rapidly, shaking her head as if she hadn't heard right. No, you can't. You can't, she screamed, her voice rising an octave. I'm the president of the HOA. You don't have the authority to arrest me. I am the authority. Daniel didn't waver. With slow, deliberate movement, he reached for his cuffs. Turn around, ma'am. Hands behind your back. The crowd gasped, neighbors leaning forward like spectators at a championship game. Karen's eyes darted from the cuffs to the cameras, then back to Daniel. Her face went pale and for the first time she looked small. Vulnerable. But then pride reared its ugly head, and she shook her head violently. No. This is corruption. You're abusing your position because he's your father, she shouted, pointing at me with trembling hands. Everyone here knows it. You're all witnesses to this injustice. A voice from the crowd called back, we're witnesses, all right? To your meltdown. Laughter rippled through the neighbors. Some clapped. Others shook their heads, muttering things like, about time, and she's finally getting what she deserves. Karen spun toward them, shrieking, traitors! All of you. Without me, your lawns would be jungles, your streets filled with garbage. Daniel stepped forward, his shadow falling over her. Ma'am, last chance. Hands behind your back. Now. Her voice cracked. No, you wouldn't dare. Daniel's tone dropped, cold and unshakable. Try me. Karen's knees buckled slightly, her body trembling. But instead of obeying, she lunged again, pushing toward me, her hands clawing at the air as though she could somehow salvage her authority with one last desperate act. That was it. In one swift motion, Daniel grabbed her arm, spun her around, and snapped the cuffs over her wrists with a sharp metallic click. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the stunned silence. Karen gasped, her eyes wide with shock, her body stiff as she struggled against the hold. No. Let me go. You can't do this to me. I am the HOA. Her screams carried down the street, but instead of sympathy, they were met with laughter, murmurs, and the steady hum of phones recording every second. Daniel spoke clearly, his voice carrying authority. You are being detained for trespassing, harassment, and disorderly conduct. You have the right to remain silent. Karen twisted in his grip, her face red and blotchy, tears of rage stinging her eyes. You'll regret this. All of you will regret this. Also. Oh. Ma'am, Daniel cut in, tightening his grip just enough to stop her thrashing. The more you resist, the worse it gets. I suggest you stay quiet. The neighbors broke into open chatter now, their voices rising in excitement and disbelief. Did you see that? One whispered. She's finally getting cuffed. Record it, record it. No one will believe this otherwise. Karen's shrieks filled the air, desperate and hollow. Don't you dare film me. Put those phones down. This is defamation. But no one stopped. If anything, more cameras came out. She was the main attraction in her own downfall, every second captured for posterity. Daniel began guiding her toward the squad car, his posture steady and controlled. Karen stumbled, her protests growing weaker as the weight of reality pressed down on her. You'll all regret this, she mumbled, her voice breaking. The board will, they'll, but even she didn't sound convinced anymore. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching. 4 years she had tormented this neighborhood with her power trips, her fines, her endless harassment. And now here she was, cuffed, humiliated, powerless in front of the very people she had lorded over. The crowd parted as Daniel led her toward the cruiser. The air buzzed with disbelief, excitement, and a strange kind of relief. But just as Daniel reached for the squad car door, Karen's voice rose again, sharp and venomous. You'll regret this, she screamed, twisting in his grip. You'll all regret this. The HOA will destroy you both. Daniel shoved her gently but firmly against the car, opening the back door. That's enough, he said, his voice like iron. The neighbors gasped, whispers flying like sparks. Phones caught every angle, every word. And then, over the din, a single voice rose from the crowd, steady, nervous, but determined. Sheriff, wait. There's something you need to know. About Karen. The murmur stopped instantly. All eyes turned toward the speaker, a neighbor stepping forward from the crowd, wringing their hands, their face pale but resolute. Karen whipped her head around, eyes blazing. Don't you dare, she shrieked. But the neighbor's lips parted, ready to speak. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Sheriff, wait. There's something you need to know. About Karen. The crowd fell silent. Even the hum of insects seemed to fade, replaced by a thick, expectant hush. All eyes turned toward the speaker, a middle-aged man in a faded polo shirt and khaki shorts, standing just beyond the curb. His hands twisted nervously, but his voice carried a quiet strength. Karen twisted against the cuffs, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare, Greg," she shrieked, her voice hoarse from all her screaming. "Keep your mouth shut or I'll—" Daniel cut her off sharply. "Ma'am, that's enough." He gave her a firm but controlled push against the squad car, keeping her steady. Then he turned his steady gaze on the man. "Go on, sir." Greg swallowed hard, then stepped forward, his sneakers crunching on the driveway. He glanced at me briefly, then at the crowd as though gathering courage. "She's been doing this for years," he said finally. "Not just to him. To all of us." The murmurs rose instantly. Neighbors leaned closer, whispers flitting like sparks in dry grass. Some nodded vigorously, others urged him on with muttered encouragement. Karen's face turned crimson. "Lies. All lies," she shrieked. But Greg pressed on, his voice gaining momentum. "She fined my wife $200 for having the wrong color mulch in our flower beds. She threatened to tow my daughter's car for parking in our own driveway. She's come onto my property uninvited more than once, snapping pictures, threatening letters." "That's procedure," Karen screeched, straining against Daniel's grip. "I was enforcing the rules." Daniel's voice sliced through the noise. "Quiet, ma'am." The crowd shifted, their murmurs rising into outrage. A woman near the back called out, "She did the same to us. She took pictures of our backyard through the fence and threatened a fine because our patio furniture was non-compliant." Another neighbor stepped forward, his voice trembling with anger. "She tried to evict my mother when she fell behind on HOA dues after her surgery. Told her she was lowering the neighborhood standard." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, faces hardened. Karen shook her head violently, her blonde bob flying. "You're exaggerating. Twisting everything. I was doing my job." But the tide had shifted. The whispers grew into louder voices, each neighbor emboldened by the others. "She yelled at my kids for riding their bikes too fast. She told me I had to cut down the tree my grandfather planted. She threatened to fine us for a garden gnome." The chorus built, wave after wave of complaints. Years of resentment spilling out at once, finally free in the open air. Karen's face crumpled with fury. She thrashed against the cuffs, her voice breaking into shrill, frantic screams. "Ungrateful. Every one of you. You'd all be living in trash heaps without me. I kept this place perfect. I sacrificed everything for this neighborhood." Daniel stood tall, letting the storm of voices crash around him. He waited until the noise reached its peak, then raised one hand. Slowly the crowd quieted. His voice carried like steel. "From what I'm hearing, this isn't just one bad day. This is a pattern. A long one." Greg nodded firmly. "That's right. She's been terrorizing us for years, hiding behind her clipboard. Nobody wanted to speak up because she made us afraid." Another voice from the crowd added, "We're not afraid anymore." A ripple of agreement swept through the neighbors. Some clapped. Others nodded, their faces hard with resolve. Karen's eyes widened, the reality sinking in. For the first time, she wasn't just fighting me. She wasn't even just fighting Daniel. She was fighting everyone. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "You're all wrong. I was protecting this place. You'll see. Without me, everything will fall apart." Her words sounded weak now, hollow. The neighbors didn't buy it. They weren't looking at her with respect or even fear anymore. They were looking at her like a tyrant who'd finally been toppled. Daniel's voice was calm, deliberate. "Ma'am, the HOA doesn't make you the law. It doesn't put you above your neighbors. What it does is give you responsibility. And you abused it." Karen let out a strangled cry, her body sagging against the squad car. Tears streamed down her face, streaking her makeup. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "Without me, they'll ruin everything. They'll destroy this neighborhood." Daniel shook his head. "From where I'm standing, this neighborhood looks a lot stronger without you in charge." The crowd erupted in applause. It wasn't wild cheering, but a steady, deliberate clap that spread house by house, neighbor by neighbor. A collective verdict. Karen's head dropped, her body trembling. The woman who had once strutted through the neighborhood with unchecked authority now stood cuffed, humiliated, rejected by the very people she claimed to protect. But just as the applause began to fade, another voice cut through. This time from a neighbor I hadn't expected. Mrs. Alvarez, an older woman who had lived 2 houses down for nearly 30 years. She stepped forward, her cane tapping against the pavement. Her voice was quiet but sharp. Sheriff, there's more you need to know. Something bigger than fines. Something she's been hiding. The crowd gasped again. All eyes shifted toward her. Karen's head snapped up, her face a mask of panic. Don't you dare, Maria, she screamed, thrashing violently. Keep your mouth shut or I'll. Daniel steadied her, his voice calm but firm. Ma'am, stop resisting. Then he turned his attention back to Mrs. Alvarez. Go ahead, he said. Mrs. Alvarez's eyes narrowed. She lifted her cane, pointing it directly at Karen. She hasn't just been harassing us, she said. She's been stealing from us. The word stealing rang out like a gunshot. Every head turned sharply toward Mrs. Alvarez, who stood with her cane planted firmly on the driveway, her eyes burning with quiet fury. Karen thrashed in the cuffs, her voice cracking. No, she's lying. Don't you listen to her. She's a bitter old woman, always jealous of me. But the crowd wasn't convinced. The murmurs turned into low gasps and whispers. Phones zoomed in closer, recording every second. Daniel's gaze narrowed. Mrs. Alvarez, he said evenly, tell me exactly what you mean. Mrs. Alvarez tightened her grip on the cane. Her voice carried, steady and unwavering. She's been skimming money from the HOA fund. For years. Dues we all paid, meant for neighborhood upkeep, repairs, landscaping. Instead of using it for us, she pocketed it. I saw the invoices. I saw the withdrawals. The crowd erupted. Shocked voices overlapped, neighbors shouting in disbelief. Karen screamed over them, her voice hoarse. No, that's slander. You can't prove anything. But Mrs. Alvarez's chin lifted with resolve. I can. I have copies. She overcharged us for landscaping contracts, claimed the company raised their prices. But I spoke to the foreman myself. He told me the price hadn't changed in 5 years. The difference went straight into Karen's account. Gasps rippled through the crowd again, louder this time. A younger man called out, that explains why our dues kept going up. Another neighbor muttered, and why nothing ever actually got fixed. Karen's face twisted, her voice trembling with desperation. They're lying. All of them. They're conspiring against me because I made them follow the rules. Daniel's jaw tightened. He pulled a small notebook from his vest, flipping it open. Mrs. Alvarez, are you willing to make a formal statement about this? Mrs. Alvarez nodded firmly. Yes. And I'm not the only one. Plenty of us have stories, Sheriff. We just never thought anyone would listen. The murmurs turned into a wave of agreement. Neighbors nodded, raising their hands, some calling out. She charged me a late fee twice for the same month. She threatened to sue me for leaving my trash bin out, but when I paid, the money never showed up on the HOA books. She collected cash for a holiday decoration fund, 3 years in a row. But where did it go? No decorations. The chorus built until it became undeniable. Karen's voice grew shrill, frantic. You're all liars. All of you. You think you can gang up on me, but I'll fight every one of you in court. I'll ruin you. Daniel stepped closer, his presence looming, his voice like stone. Ma'am, you've just gone from trespassing and harassment to possible fraud and embezzlement. These are serious allegations. Karen froze, her breath hitching. For the first time, real fear flickered across her face. Her eyes darted wildly, scanning the crowd, searching desperately for a single ally. But every face was turned against her. No, she whispered, her voice cracking. No, you can't do this. I gave everything to this neighborhood. I deserve something back. Her words fell flat, drowned in the weight of the accusations. Greg stepped forward again, his voice steady. You took advantage of us, Karen. Of our trust. You weren't protecting the neighborhood, you were bleeding it dry. Karen shook her head violently, tears streaming now. I kept it perfect. You think those flowers by the entrance planted themselves? You think the fence repairs were free? I worked harder than anyone here. Mrs. Alvarez raised her cane, pointing directly at her. You worked hard to line your pockets. That's all. The neighbors murmured in agreement, their voices heavy with anger and betrayal. Daniel held up a hand, silencing the crowd. His eyes locked on Karen. Ma'am, you've heard the accusations. You're already in custody. The next step is investigation. If evidence supports these claims, you'll be facing far more serious charges than trespassing. Karen sagged against the squad car, her strength finally faltering. Her blouse clung to her in the heat, her hair disheveled, her face streaked with sweat and tears. You don't understand, she sobbed. I was trying to keep control. If I didn't, this place would fall apart. People need rules. Without me, everything turns to chaos. A man in the crowd called back, No, Karen. Without you, it finally feels like freedom." The neighbors murmured in agreement, some nodding, some clapping lightly. The weight of years of oppression was lifting right there in that driveway. Daniel's voice was steady, almost gentle. "Ma'am, your time in charge is over." Karen's eyes burned with desperation. She twisted her head toward me, her face contorted with rage. "This is your fault," she screamed. "If you hadn't called him, if you hadn't defied me, none of this would have come out." I didn't flinch. I simply crossed my arms and met her stare. "You did this to yourself, Karen." Her scream tore through the air, guttural and broken. She struggled against the cuffs, her voice echoing down the street. "I'll take you all down with me. Do you hear me? This isn't over." Daniel steadied her with one firm hand, then looked back to the neighbors. "If anyone else has information about HOA misconduct, bring it to me. We'll make sure this gets investigated properly." The crowd nodded, murmurs of agreement and relief spreading like a wave. Phones lowered slowly, people exhaling after the storm. But just as Daniel began guiding Karen toward the squad car again, she twisted her head, her eyes blazing with one final desperate threat. "You'll regret this. Every one of you. The HOA will bury you in lawsuits. And you," she glared at me with venom, "you'll pay the highest price of all." Her words hung in the heavy summer air, dripping with menace. Daniel paused, tightening his grip. He looked her square in the eye, his voice low and firm. "Karen, the only one paying a price here is you." The crowd erupted into applause again, louder this time, stronger, their voices united. But under the noise, Karen's whisper carried faintly, chillingly. "This isn't over." The street buzzed with voices, a mixture of disbelief, vindication, and long overdue relief. Neighbors clustered in small groups, murmuring, some clapping, others just staring as though they couldn't quite believe what they'd just witnessed. Karen sagged against the squad car, her face streaked with sweat and tears, her blouse wrinkled and stained. Her blonde bob, once so sharp and precise, clung limply to her forehead. She was still muttering under her breath, her words a slurry of rage and denial. Daniel kept one firm hand on her shoulder as he opened the back door of the cruiser. The metallic hinges groaned, the sound sharp in the humid summer air. "Watch your head," he said calmly as he guided her inside. Karen twisted, trying to make her final plea to the audience she'd ruled over for so long. "Don't let them do this. I was protecting you. I was keeping order. You'll regret this, every one of you." But her voice no longer carried weight. The neighbors didn't look at her with fear. They looked at her with exhaustion and something else, freedom. The door shut with a heavy thunk, the lock clicking into place. For the first time, Karen was silent. A wave of murmurs rose again, some relieved laughter threading through it. One man muttered, "Can't believe it finally happened." Another woman wiped at her eyes, whispering, "It feels like a weight's been lifted." Daniel turned to the crowd, his voice steady but loud enough to carry. "If any of you have evidence or statements about misconduct, bring them to the station. What I've heard today will be investigated. The law will handle the rest." There were nods all around. A few neighbors even applauded softly. Others promised to dig out old letters, fines, and suspicious invoices that had piled up over the years. Mrs. Alvarez leaned on her cane, her face lined but resolute. She thought she owned us. But today she learned she never did. The neighbors murmured in agreement, some patting her shoulder, others thanking her for speaking up. I stood in the doorway of my home, arms crossed, still processing everything. 4 years, Karen had been a thorn in everyone's side, her clipboard a weapon she wielded like a sword. And now she was just another resident, one who had gone too far, one who would face real consequences. Daniel approached me, his eyes softening as he set aside the authority of the badge for a moment. "You okay, Dad?" I exhaled slowly, nodding. "Better than I've felt in a long time." He gave me a small smile, then turned back to the crowd. "This community deserves peace. And peace doesn't come from fear. It comes from respect." The words carried, settling over the neighbors like a cool breeze. Heads nodded, shoulders loosened. For the first time in years, people looked at each other with something new, solidarity. The squad car engine rumbled to life, the red-blue lights still flashing. Karen sat in the back seat, her face pressed against the glass, eyes wild and desperate. She mouthed words no one could hear, but the message was clear. She still thought she was in control. But as Daniel slid into the driver's seat, the reality hit. The cruiser pulled away slowly, rolling down the street. The neighbors watched in silence as the car disappeared around the corner, the flashing lights fading until they were gone completely. And with them, the reign of HOA Karen ended. The crowd exhaled as one. People turned to each other, sharing stories, shaking hands, even laughing a little. For the first time, the street didn't feel like a stage for Karen's rules. It felt like a neighborhood again. Greg walked up to me, his face still pale but relieved. "Thank you for calling the sheriff," he said quietly. "If you hadn't stood up to her, none of us would have had the courage." I shook my head. It wasn't just me. It was all of you. She thrived on fear, and today that fear finally broke. Mrs. Alvarez added softly, "Sometimes it only takes one voice to open the door. After that, everyone else finds theirs too." The words settled into me. She was right. For too long, we'd let Karen's voice dominate, drowning out our own. Today had changed that. As neighbors drifted back to their homes, there was laughter where there had once been tension. Kids returned to their bikes. Sprinklers ticked again. The street felt lighter. I lingered on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in streaks of orange and pink. Daniel stood beside me, his badge glinting in the fading light. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. I nodded. "Maybe. But I couldn't have done it without you." He smiled faintly. "That's what family's for." For a long moment we just stood there, father and son, watching the neighborhood breathe again. Finally I turned toward the camera, toward you, the viewer. "Neighbors like Karen exist everywhere," I said. "People who believe power gives them the right to control, to intimidate, to take what isn't theirs. But today proved something important. When communities stand together, when truth comes out, even the loudest voices can be silenced." I paused, letting the weight of the words linger. "So let me ask you, what would you have done if your neighbor tried to force their way into your home? Would you have stood your ground? Or would you have stayed quiet, hoping someone else would act?" I leaned forward slightly, my voice soft but direct. "Think about it. And if you believe in standing up for yourself, in standing up for what's right, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this story. Because we all deserve neighborhoods built on respect, not fear." The screen faded slowly, the last image lingering on the sunset over a quiet, peaceful street. A street finally free.